The European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen says that Ukraine could join the European Union in the next 5 years if it presses ahead with reforms. She was speaking in Kyiv on the third anniversary of Russia's full-scale invasion. Around a dozen leaders from the EU and Canada also travelled to Ukraine. Spain has announced €1 billion in military aid for Kyiv. But tensions are rising between Ukraine and the US, its biggest backer. Let's take a look back at how Russia's invasion of Ukraine began and some of the major events that have happened since then.
Russia's invasion began just before 4 in the morning, on land and from the air. Soon afterwards, Russian tanks started rolling over the border into Ukraine. 10 days later, Russian troops had reached the Kyiv suburbs, barely 20 kilometers from President Zelensky's office. In downtown Kyiv, people could hear the artillery fire on the edge of their city. But Russian troops had underestimated Ukrainian resistance and overstretched their logistics. By early April, Ukraine had pushed Russian troops out of the Kyiv region. As they did so, they came across first evidence of Russian atrocities, like here in Bucha. These were the scenes in Kherson when Ukrainian troops retook the city after 8 months of Russian occupation. Beginning in September, Ukraine retook thousands of square kilometers of territory in the south and east of the country. While Ukraine had gone hard and fast during the previous autumn, Russia's army went for slow and steady advance, mainly in the east. After 10 months of so-called meat grinder siege, Russia captured what was left of the city of Bakhmut. More than 60,000 Russian soldiers are estimated to have been killed or wounded taking the city. After months of speculation, months in which Russia was able to build defences and lay minefields, Ukraine launched its long-awaited counteroffensive. The results were meagre. Ukraine was only able to shift the front line by a few hundred square kilometres. This was something no one had expected. Ukrainian troops on Russian soil. With the front lines in the south and the east well defended and heavily mined, Ukraine struck when Moscow was least expecting it. Within a couple of days, Ukraine had taken the town of Sudzha and surrounding villages. In early January 2025, Ukraine stepped up its long-range drone attacks on Russian oil facilities. The aim was to disrupt the fuel supply to the Russian army, as well as reducing the Kremlin's export earnings. As Russia's invasion of Ukraine reaches its third anniversary, Russia controls about 20% of Ukrainian territory. More than 12,000 Ukrainian civilians have been confirmed killed, and a further 30,000 injured. The true figures are believed to be significantly higher. Military casualty figures are kept under wraps on both sides. Conservative estimates put the military death toll at 80,000 on the Ukrainian side and 200,000 on the Russian side, with many more wounded.
DW correspondent Nick Connolly filed that report, and I asked him what European leaders and President Zelensky had discussed and decided at the summit today in Kyiv.
Well, obviously, they can't do a great deal about NATO without Donald Trump coming on side. So that kind of security component that the Ukrainians would want so dearly is basically on ice. We don't know if indefinitely or not, but for now, as you just mentioned earlier in the show about the EU, I think that was a really kind of important intervention from a Ukrainian perspective. Joining the EU normally is something that can take years and years. So the idea that this is going to be potentially done in the space of 5 years or even earlier, said Commission President von der Leyen, if Ukraine keeps up the pace of reforms that it has already, even during wartime, that is something that I think lots of people will be very happy to hear. It doesn't provide them security. It's not the same as security guarantees, but it is a kind of economic and social perspective, something for people to think about. And now, that's the kind of longer perspective. And now, the next couple of weeks, we're going to see how Donald Trump and Volodymyr Zelensky get on. We've just heard in the last half hour or so, Donald Trump saying that he's expecting to see and meet Zelensky in person in the next week or two to sign this minerals deal. It's been very contentious between Ukraine and the US. Volodymyr Zelensky being very vocal that he wouldn't sign anything that he says will take Ukraine hundreds of years to pay off. So lots of kind of diplomatic fireworks expected. But the bigger picture, at least with Europe, is that Ukraine, according to the leaders here today, is on its way to Europe.
That's Nick Connolly reporting from Kyiv. Now, Maria Avdeeva is with the Foreign Policy Research Institute think tank. I spoke to her earlier and asked whether moves to end the war are making any difference at all on the battlefield.
Well, you know that the real fighting is happening in Ukraine, and I've just yesterday have been meeting Ukrainian soldiers, Ukrainian artillery unit in Kharkiv region, and they say we don't feel any negotiations or anything happening because what we feel are constant Russian attacks, and what we know is how we have to repel them and keep our positions so that Russians will not be able to move further. And the only thing they were in real need of is more munition and more artillery shells, because this allows them to keep their position. And I think this is what the most important, so that everyone realizes that this is Ukrainian army, Ukrainian soldiers who are now protecting and defending not only Ukraine, but Europe from further Russian aggression. And everyone needs to do very quickly as much as possible so that Ukraine can continue keeping up the front line, because while Russia is taking time for negotiations and using this time, they keep on pushing and they keep on attacking Ukraine. Like every night here in Kyiv, hundreds of drones are being launched and Ukrainian air defense is shutting them down. So all of this needs a lot of resources, a lot of military resources, and this is what is the most critical for Ukraine at the moment.
Well, European leaders, of course, are in Kyiv right now. They say they want to provide more support for Ukraine. Do we know what that might look like?
Well, they were talking a lot about supporting Ukrainian capabilities to produce more weapons, and Ukraine, in fact, increased the producing of its own weapons through these 3 years of the war just amazingly. But this is, of course, not enough. Ukraine alone will not be able, even with the support, with the weapons, to defend against Russia, because Ukraine most importantly needs critical security guarantees. And this is what we did not hear, unfortunately, today from European leaders. Yes, EU membership might be something that will be as a guarantee, but this will happen, as we have heard, only after 2030 year. But Ukraine needs some guarantees right now, and this is what Ukrainians are asking our partners about. What will guarantee that Russia will not attack again with a more greater power, is a more developed military capabilities?
The US and Ukraine have been going back and forth on this minerals deal. The details are unclear, but I mean, you mentioned the need for security guarantees. There are suggestions that security guarantees for Ukraine might be included. I mean, do we know what this deal could mean for Ukraine?
Well, unfortunately, no details have been reported yet, but President Zelensky made it clear that security guarantees must be in that deal. And actually, a lot of these minerals are located in the east of Ukraine, in the areas which are currently basically constantly attacked by Russia, or even are in the territories occupied by Russia. And this is a good question, whether U.S. companies will actually invest money in the areas which will be later either attacked by Russia, or Russia will be trying to occupy them, because this is what Russian strategy is, to occupy more Ukrainian territory. And will it bring the more military aid from the U.S. to defend at least these investments? And all of this we will hear pretty soon, because the reports are that this deal will be made very soon. And President Zelensky also have said that they are going to announce it in the upcoming days or weeks.
The US has said that both sides, Ukraine and Russia, will have to make concessions in order to reach an agreement. What kind of concessions would Ukraine be willing to make?
Well, I wouldn't call it concessions from a Ukrainian side, because here we are not speaking about two partners. Here we are speaking about the aggressor state, and Russia is an aggressor state, and country that is constantly under Russian attacks and where Russia invaded. And if we talk about what Ukrainian talking position is, or position in the negotiations, Ukraine has already said that we are ready to diplomatically end the war. And Ukraine at the moment does not have military capabilities to deoccupy territories currently occupied by Russia. We will never admit these territories as Russian control, but at the moment we are not able to return them. The time will come when Ukraine will be more prepared, will get more weapons and more capabilities and to retake back these territories. But at the time being, diplomatic means is what Ukraine has and what Ukraine proposes. And this is, I think, a very big step towards the possible deal which will end the war.
Maria Avdeeva from the Foreign Policy Research Institute think tank. Maria, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.